Self-cast Forbidden Rite is still incredible. This is my third time playing Self-cast Forbidden Rite, and now I'm playing it on my third Ascendancy. This time I chose the Pathfinder. Pathfinder seems to have fallen a bit out of favor, which means it's right up my alley. And through this we get incredible amounts of defense and survivability that allows us to go into a lot of offense on our passive skill tree and on our gear. As always, when building around Recoup in Forbidden Rite, this build is incredibly tanky because of its massive recovery. When you have high amounts of recovery, it's important that you don't take big hits and that you have enough of a life pool to take those big hits, because the small ones do nothing because you effectively fill your entire life pool in less than a second, no matter how much damage you take. The only thing that can kill this build is one-shots, and they do not happen very often. There are a couple of mandatory expensive uniques in this build, and as always, anytime I use the Stasis Prison, it does go up in price. So if you do want to play this build, you are going to have to fork over the cash for that. There are some alternative options that I will talk about, but this build also uses a Progenesis. Progenesis isn't just good for this build is designed for Progenesis. We end up getting over 40% of damage taken over time instead of on hit, and of course damage over time does not affect this build due to our massive recovery of life. It effectively just acts as a 40% less damage flask, which of course is up all the time because of Pathfinder. We make use of the Soul Ascension unique gloves that give Soul Eater on hit. Soul Eater is capped to 50. It took a big nerf this leak. These gloves are incredibly strong. The more you juice your maps, the more rares you'll run into, the more Soul Eater that you'll have. Working in the same vein as a Headhunter would, the more rares you encounter, the more powerful you become. These gloves are very, very underrated. There are tons of places to improve this build if you want to push this into the hundreds of divine price range, but I think I ended up spending around 140 divines on the build. Of course, prices change. I have no idea what some of these gear pieces are going for. I bought some of them weeks ago, so you'll have to price check some of the more expensive items yourself. If you want to play this build, make sure you stick around throughout the video and find out all the tips and tricks on how to solve problems in this build, because there are some, but at the end of the day, this is a fantastic all-around build that's really fun to play. All right, so let's get into it. This is Forbidden Rite, Pathfinder, Self-cast. Okay, so here we have level 97 Cynthia Spellweaver. We asked ChatGPT to make a character name for a Forbidden Rite Pathfinder, and this is what it gave us. So we are Cynthia Spellweaver and Sin for the, the evil of poison. AI stuff. So because we're a Pathfinder, let's first talk about this belt. This belt is incredibly powerful. The only one we care about on here is Utility Flask, gain 3 charges. So ultimately, it's not that expensive to get a good one. I think it was about a divine when I bought it. But you don't care about the life roll or the mana roll, and nothing else actually has a roll on the belt. So just get one with 3 Utility Flask charges per second. The reason that this is so powerful is because it doesn't say that magic flasks get an increased effect. It says all flasks, which means our Progenesis is getting 25% effect. We also get a little bit more, and it ends up being that when hit during effect, 40% of life loss from damage taken occurs over 4 seconds instead. It also means that we're getting a bunch more chaos res from this. Our Taste of Hate is giving us something like 22% physical damage taken as cold, and then of course all of our other flasks are also getting their effects buffed. But this belt is absolutely phenomenal. Getting a unique flask increased effect is incredibly powerful and means that Progenesis is a must-have in this build. I would not play this build unless you can buy a Progenesis or can farm one in the near future. So sticking with the gear that is expensive, we have the Stasis Prison. Right now, Stasis Prisons are going for 20 divines. There's 17 on the market. I paid 16 for mine, but that was a couple of weeks ago. And if a few people start to play this build, that number of Stasis Prisons is going to drop. So as always, keep an eye on the price of this. If you get into playing this build, make sure you check the price and buy a Stasis Prison first. Why is this so strong? The Stasis Prison gives us 95% of damage taken recouped as life. Recoup is a mechanic that gives you damage taken recovered over 4 seconds. So if I take 100 damage, I will recover 25 life every second for 4 seconds. We end up getting a little bit more than 100% recoup through some other gear. So there's actually other options with Stasis Prison. If you wanted to go, you could get recoup. My ring is actually really bad and I should have replaced it and I never did, but you can get recoup on a ring. You could go for like a helical ring and get increased effect. To get even more recoup, you can get recoup on the tree. And now there's actually a haunted modifier in the graveyard that gives you 35% life recoup. That's not enough to replace the Stasis Prison, but you do want to get over 100% recoup in order to play this build. The more you get, the better it's going to feel. Other places you get recoup, I have them on a bunch of jewels. This build has a ton of jewels in it, to the point where you can go adorned and go for recoup on your jewels, and then you can get things like chaos.multi, life, cast speed. I actually started crafting adorned jewels for this build, and then I remembered how much I hate crafting adorned jewels, and I sold them all, and I just went for regular jewels. So if you have the patience, go for adorned. So getting a lot of recoup is really important. I would like 100% minimum to play this build. So if you can't get a stasis prison or don't want to use the stasis prison, you can go for the haunted graveyard modifier and then just really invest into recoup elsewhere. Next, let's talk about these gloves. These are fantastic gloves, but I think Crouching Tuna was using them. Shout out Tuna. And that has made getting corruptions on these very expensive. So the way this works is you eat a soul every time you hit a rare or unique enemy, up to twice per second. Because we hit so often, we are getting 2 per second, which means against bosses, you are ramping very, very quickly. In the PoE, I have 5 souls ticked, but we can get, I believe, up to 55 with the max +5 that we have on this. And with 55, we are attacking... We are casting so fast that we actually can't even keep up our energy shield pool, but usually things die before we get there anyway. While mapping, if you are doing really juice maps, these gloves are going to be getting you to max pretty much the whole time, and you're going to feel like you're flying. It's really, really nice. We are using the Anathema ring. Originally, I used this and I had 4 curses, but that was before I switched to these gloves. So in the gloves, we have cast when damage taken, temporal chains, unfeeble, and despair. So that means we are attacking, hurting ourselves, and you can see our curses going off when we take a certain amount of damage. They're constantly going off, and if we had a curse on hit on these gloves, I would want to add punishment back into the build, and there is a power charge right here for 1 point that you can get to a power charge limit of 4. That is how Anathema works. Whatever your power charge limit is, that's your curse limit. Incredibly strong, and because we can cast curses with no effort, using this is a no-brainer. So if you can get a curse on hit soul ascension, or maybe a curse on hit ring, again, this ring is trash. It's a relic of a former version of the build that I just never upgraded. Get another curse, and then you can add in punishment to your set of curses here. This weapon, I actually put this on when I hit level 70 just to kind of get myself to endgame. And the reality is, crafting a weapon for this build that's better than this is incredibly expensive. I will put up on the screen now something that is better than this. You can get about 50% more damage than this scepter with the weapon that I put on screen. I never crafted it. That's the best in slot. You can try to get close to that. But the thing about the Darkseer that makes it so nice is you get 10% chance to blind enemies on hit, which is incredibly strong. We are an evasion-based build, so blind is a more multiplier to that, but also enemies blinded by you have malediction. Malediction is 10% reduced damage dealt by enemies, so you take 10% less damage, but also 10% more damage taken. That's not as strong because we have wither, and when you combine all of the damage taken sources, 10% more is not that much. But another thing on here that is incredibly strong is +2 ES per level. So we're level 97, let's just call it 100. That is 200 flat energy shield, and you need a lot of energy shield on this build to deal with the cost of casting. We have instant leech from the tree. This is pretty much mandatory. You can even take this side to get a little bit more, but instant leech is going to give you a lot of recovery on single target for your energy shield pool. You definitely need it. I actually think I might even recommend dropping Deadly Ailment support, despite this being a massive damage multiplier. It makes your hits do less damage, which makes your leech significantly less effective. I think my current ES leech is around 330, but if I take this off and put on any other gem, it goes up to 550. So that might be worth it. You get damage from other places. You get a better shield and weapon, and then you can replace this and you'll be at dot cap. Anyway, so definitely something to think about if you're having mana issues. I didn't mind it. When you run out of mana, you're usually doing so much damage because you're casting so fast that it doesn't really affect you, but it is a little bit annoying, and that's how you can fix it. So that's the scepter. Let's talk about the shield. I will also put the best in slot shield up on screen. This is just something that I made in PoE. If you can figure out how to gravecraft this or something similar, you can replace the shield. The reason this shield is so strong is because, one, you can get double corrupted Fizz Taken As on it, and Leper's Alms is a fairly common shield, so there's a decent number of these available. You can get double Fizz Taken As, and Fizz taken as is our only source of physical damage reduction, as well as some life, duration of ailments, which is nice for poison, but then a massive amount of ES and evasion. Getting this amount of energy shield on a shield requires at least one prefix, which means you're going to have to try to get life, an ES prefix, and then maybe a +1 level, which is challenging to get. So crafting something better than this is actually going to be really hard, and I think I paid like 50C for this. So you probably want to start with a Leper's Alms, and if you in the end game can craft something giga, you can swap out the Leper's Alms, and you can actually get some more max res, which would be really nice. The Replica Dragon Fangs, this is a no-brainer. Forbidden Rite +3, we get to level 27. This gives us some reservation efficiency, which we use pretty efficiently. So nothing too crazy going on here. This helmet, I was just looking to get something pretty good to get me going, and I crafted this when I first got to maps, and I got incredibly lucky hitting the prefixes, so I never ended up changing this. So I just use an essence until I hit a tier 1 resistance on a fractured spell base. But then I slammed 2 Eldritch Exalts on it and hit tier 1 flat and tier 1% evasion. So this is a 1200 evasion helmet. What you really want to do here is go for either a Hubris Circlet or a Deicide Mask, which is the evasion and energy shield base. And then you want to take increased energy shield from the equipped helmet right on this node here. That will effectively double how much ES you get from your helmet. If you go get a 300 ES helmet, you're going to add 600 ES plus to your energy shield pool, and it'll make it way easier to keep your spells cast. It's unfortunate that this build costs so much mana to cast, but it just is the way it is. Cast speed directly scales our damage and our defense. The faster you're casting, the faster you're recovering, the faster you're recouping. As you see, once we start getting our casts up, and this is with no buffs, our health pool is just constantly topped off. So definitely recommend at least going for a hybrid base with energy shield here. I just got really lucky and hit a crazy helmet. On the boots, you want to get Shock Avoid. I actually bought these because they had movement speed cannot be slowed below base value on them. And another haunted modifier to get avoid being shocked, but you can easily craft these with a fractured base. The movement speed cannot be modified. It's just for things like maim and hinder, I'm pretty sure. It doesn't work against all types of slows. It's not nearly as effective as it looks, so don't worry too much about not getting that on your boots, but you definitely want some res. Some regen is fine, and avoid being shocked as a suffix and an implicit to get to 100% chance because we use the Storm Shroud Jewel. Poisons inflict damage 5% faster. It's just a nice to have because we have a pretty long duration. So let's quickly talk about the flasks. We go tri-Ellie flasks here with Ruby, Topaz, and Taste of Hate. Taste of Hate is super effective for Fizz taken as, and this also helps us get really, really high resistances, which you can increase even higher with a better shield. We also use the Progenesis, of course, we already talked about that, and then a move speed flask with Ellie res in order to get us over cap. If you can get better suffixes on gear, craft a better ring here. You don't need that. You'll open up a suffix. I'd probably go for curse immunity because I think I only have a bit of that on the build. We get cast speed on our Ruby flask. Cast speed, again, is damage and defense. Over here, we get 15% of damage taken from hits is leached as life during effect. That means the damage we're doing to ourselves is leeching as life. So we are always at leech cap. It doesn't show up in PoB, but it is there, and it's a bunch of recovery. You really notice the difference between throwing this on and not. For our jewels, we'll talk first in the helmet. We have Grace, Haste, Herald of Agony, and Enlighten 3. You don't need a 4. I have 13 mana left. If you have it set up like me, I have 9% reservation on the amulet. I think an 8% will work. 7 I don't believe will. So if you get less than that, you'll need an Enlighten 4, which you obviously don't want. That's very expensive. But our haste is actually being used. It's not just Vol Haste. Vol Haste is here on my D button, but we use the haste because cast speed equals damage and defense. In our shield, we have a shield charge alongside of Arctic Armor and Temporal Rift. Temporal Rift gives us cooldown recovery, which is really nice for our automated skill. On automation, which is constantly going off, as you can see, we have a Withering Step and a Mortal Call. Mortal Call's uptime is incredibly high in this build. We have a 2.4 second cooldown and a 1.1 second buff, so we actually have about a third uptime on a Mortal Call, which is really cool. You can actually go even harder into cooldown recovery and get a really, really high uptime here. Then we have Blood Rage, which is just always going off to give us frenzy charges while mapping. It also gives us more attack speed for our shield charge, so our shield charge feels really zippy. And then Withering Step is always going off as well. This is giving us base wither debuffs every time it goes off to nearby enemies. So we are pretty much at max wither stacks the second we start fighting a boss, which is incredibly strong. In our gloves, we have the cast when damage taken triple curse setup that we talked about. And then we have a Malevolence, Divine Blessing inspiration setup. You don't need the inspiration if you get enough energy shield, which I didn't feel like I had enough, so I put the inspiration on. If you take this off, cost goes up pretty significantly, goes maybe from a third to a half, but I would recommend just getting the, more sources of leech and a bigger ES pool, and then you won't need this and you'll get a gem slot freed up. In our main 6 link, we have a 21-23 Forbidden Rite. The 23 is not relevant. It doesn't do anything for us. It was just the same price as a 21-20, so I bought it. But getting a 21 is very important. It's a lot of damage. Awakened Void Manip is a +1 and more damage. GMP allows us to fire additional projectiles. You can only hit a main target with, I believe, 5 projectiles without significant AoE investment, and we don't want to do that, so we fire just the 5 projectiles at the enemy. Deadly Elements we talked about. Spell Echo gives us more cast speed. Spell Echo also gives us repeat an additional time, which means it casts a second time, but we don't have to pay the cost of it. So not only are we casting way faster, but we are essentially having the cost of casting that many times. Lastly, we use Awaken Unbound Ailments. I know that a lot of people say this is fake PoB DPS, and for the most part it is, but the only other reasonable option would be Cruelty, and we can't use that as long as we're using Deadly Ailments. So unfortunately, Unbound Ailments is just going to be our best damage gem here. You could go for something like an Empower, or because this build already gets to level 27, over level 30 becomes less efficient, and the Empower is actually not that effective. So it's just unfortunate, like we don't really have a good 6th gem to use, so Unbound Ailments it is. Okay, in our tree, let's first talk about the clusters. So the large clusters, there's really good stuff. I don't necessarily have the most optimal ones, but here are some things that you want to look for. Unholy Grace is far and away the best notable that you can get, so try to get that on both if you can. I have it here. Touch of Cruelty gives you a chance to hinder, and then it makes enemies take increased damage. Hinder is nice because it slows enemies. Over here I have Unwaveringly Evil. This gives us Chaos Skills ignore interruptions from stuns. The reason that this is so important is this is effectively stun immunity while you're fighting bosses. The way that you fight bosses on this build is you run right up to them, you stand still, and you hold down right click. As long as you're doing that, you're stun immune. Another reason that Arctic Armor is so effective in this build is because you want to be standing still. When I'm fighting the Exarch, I'm standing still. During the ball phase, I'm standing still and I'm holding my right click, which means my Arctic Armor is always on. So Unwaveringly Evil is effectively stun immunity while you're fighting. And Wicked Paul is just another good damage source. For our mediums, try not to meme on me too hard because I accidentally bought a wrong one, but Septic Spells, we have a couple of these. You want to make sure that you have over at least 100% poison chance. If you go over by a little bit, it's not a big deal. I think I have 105. Flow of Life is regen, damage over time in life. This is incredible. I think I have 2 of this set up here. Yep, Septic Spells and Flow of Life. And then here you want Spike Concoction and Brood for potency. This is damage over time, charges gained, and Alchemist Genius is super, super strong. So you want to have one of these set up. Again, you want to make sure that your flasks are at full uptime. Lastly, I accidentally bought a burning damage version of this. We've got Flow of Life and Circling Oblivion. Circling Oblivion, again, is duration. We have too much duration in the build, so you definitely want to drop some so you can get something else here. There's plenty of good stuff on these mediums, but I accidentally bought a burning medium instead of a chaos damage over time medium. I was just looking for these two and bought the wrong base. So make sure you get the right base when you're buying these. Take this as a learning opportunity. Our jewels are going to look something like this. Cast speed while holding a shield, life, poison, damage recoup, chaos damage over time. We've got a few of those in different spots on the tree. Again, very, very similar. These are super, super strong. You can go adorned. We have a Storm Shroud here with reduced effective curses. If you take it if you get reduced effective curses on one of your flasks, you don't need these, obviously. I have a jewel here for cast speed, corrupted blood, and it also gives me phasing. Phasing on this build is super important. You pretty much have to get it. Anytime you have a poison build where you are running like through packs, you want to have phasing in the build. This is another Cobalt jewel here. Pretty much the same stuff. Our Watcher's Eye is damage over time and onslaught on kill. I don't have an onslaught source, so this is not up on bosses, but while you're mapping, you're always affected by haste, so onslaught on kill. Lastly, a Parandus Pact. Of course, you can get one of these with a corruption, but this one I think is, we have 17 nodes here, so it's 102% increased chaos damage. That's obviously a ton. You could even take these 2 points if you wanted to get you another max cold res, get you some resists, some chaos damage, some evasion. This is really, really strong. The way that you make this is you get the 4 Parandus family members, you get increased likelihood of chaos mods, you reduce the chances of getting resists, and you put in a bunch of corruption implicits. I usually use 6 to 8, and that hits maybe 75% of the time. But I don't know the exact numbers on how many things that you need of each, but that is how you make the Parandus Pact with chaos damage. Keep in mind, if you go for a pure ES base, you can't use the Spell Suppress Mastery here. That's why I recommended a Deicide Mask, but just keep that in mind. We have Recover Life when you use a Flask, which is always, so we get a ton from that. We have the Instant Leech Mastery, which is pretty much mandatory. We use the Chaos Mastery up here to give you a chance to get to max Wither. Again, this is just for damage ramping. The faster you get to max Wither, the more damage you do. So between Withering Step and this, we're just always at max Wither. And then lastly, Eldritch Battery up here, absolutely mandatory for this build. This build does not work with mana. There's no way to do it, so gotta have EB. So that is it for this build. I had an absolute blast with this. This build is so much fun. It's so tanky. It's so zoomy. I can definitely highly recommend this to someone who's looking to spend a little bit of money and get a pretty awesome build in return. If you like this kind of content, make sure to like the video, comment down below, and subscribe to the channel. If you really want to support me, you can stop by my Twitch, twitch.tv/AER0___. I am live almost every single day, and I will be live right after this video. You can stop by and drop that Twitch Prime. Thank you so much. I appreciate each and every one of you. And as always, take care.